aesthetics and politics concern always about alter pedagogical and alter economic practices. Pedagogical experiments are central to her work, some of which occur at Concordia University in Montreal, where she is a research chair in speculative pragmatism, art, and pedagogy in the Faculty of Fine Arts. Recent monographs include The Minor Gesture, 2016, For Pragmatics of the Useless, 2020, and Out of the Clear, forthcoming. Her artwork is textile-based and relationally oriented, often participatory. She is interested in the detail of material complexity, in what reveals itself to perception sideways, in the quality of a textual engagement with life. Her work often plays synesthetically with touch of recent in acknowledgement and experimentation with the pro-tactile movement of deaf-blind culture and language. Tactile propositions include large-scale hangings produced with a diversity of tools, including tufting, hooking, knotting, weaving. 3E is a main direction of her current research, which her current research takes. And then I want to read a little bit about something from the reader that Erin produced for us. It's from The Speculative Garden. I think it's perfect for what we're doing here. And so I think it's really important. Sustainability has the whiff of decay. It feels like the lowest common denominator of a practice that has stopped naturing, excuse me. That's very important, stop naturing. In this holding pattern, a certain leveling is accomplished. A methodology is set in place so that processes can be streamlined. A necessary evil, we are told. We have always found ways to subtract ourselves from difference in the taming of nature. In this speculative engagement with what else a garden can be in the context of the Three Ecologies project, an opening is perhaps created for another way, and with it, other modes of attunement to how nature natures. Prelude. When there is nothing to govern, nothing to secure, there is blackness. Scene 1. Bark Skins, a novel by Annie Proulx, is a literary account of the violence of the clearing that was endemic to settler colonialism in Canada and the northern US at the time of early colonization by the French and later by the English, starting with an early arrival in the 1600s and continuing to the multi-generational raping of the land by the steady influx of colonizers. The book relentlessly marks the passage from plenitude to desecration, the forest denuded at the cost of upheaval and death of the people who never sought to clear them. This story is ultimately not about trees, of course, but about the violence of cultural clearing and the genocide it leaves behind. And yet it is also about trees, about those enormous pines, the forest, unimaginable, the pristine before when lands were rich and people lived out of the clear. At these accounts, the story begins with the Frenchman Trompigny, and though First Nations characters make their way into the story and even become main characters, the reader never forgets that is the colonizer who enters first and who makes the first cut. The scene is as we expect: black flies, mud, rain, dark forest, inimical wilderness. How big is the forest? One of the early colonizers asked. It is the forest of the world. It is infinite. It twists around as a snake, swallows its own tail, and has no end, no beginning. No one has seen its further dimension. 3, the first tree made into a gold single. And with that, I'd like to introduce and welcome Erin Manning. I'm going to turn myself off now. I'll see you later.
Thank you so much for that, Warren. Can you hear me well? Good. Okay. Just to let you know that I'm on satellite internet because I'm
I don't hear you. I don't know if other people don't hear you, but I don't hear you.
I
Does
can
everybody
hear
hear her?
I can hear
her.
fine.
Yeah, I hear her perfectly.
Yeah, me too.
I hear good as well.
I can hear you.
Okay, I don't know what's wrong. Okay.
Do you want me to wait, Warren? Should I just go ahead? What do you guys think?
Perfect.
Yeah? Okay. All right. What I wanted to say is that if I do get kicked off the internet, because it does happen up here off the grid, I will simply post the paper, so no panic. And I will also post it anyway, whether or not I get off. So yeah, let's hope the internet holds. All right. The Speculative Garden, Part 1. Scene 1. The trees are a concern. We invite him in to cull. The solar panels are shaded by the tallest ones. Decisions have to be made. We can't cut them all down. How much energy is enough? Sustainable, capable of being endured, continuing to exist. The solar panels are really in the wrong place. More money should go into raising them, into pushing them above the treetops. Strange, this standoff with the forest, caught up with the desire to reduce the burning of fossil fuels, to not need the generator on those cloudy days where the sun just can't get through. He comes and we stand on the edge of the cliff and look at the river. Which trees should fall? He points at the trees. We nod or change our mind. No, not that birch. It's so beautiful. There is no rational standpoint. A bit of shade brought on by this one is not so bad, is it? But that one, yes, that one should go down with the conifers. I go down to where he is. He doesn't talk much. Instead, he holds his hands in front of his eyes, mimicking, taking a photograph. Yes, he says. There's a path here, I say. Can we move the fallen trees off the path? I love the moss. He looks down. Yes, he says, we will make sure the path remains. The dog runs around us, excited by the sound of the chainsaw. Scene 2. We are disappointed. The sun is still not coming up high enough in the sky. November in the north is hard for solar sites. We would have to cut down all the trees, or at least their tips, to benefit from its weak glare. He is still cutting, moving, sorting. Every once in a while, I see him stand, look around, his photographic gaze scanning the surround. Sometimes he tells me something he sees. He is hard to understand. Some people tell me there is a story there. I think it's neurodiversity. He feels the forest, and for that, there are no words. Now he is cutting the downed trees into logs. Since we purchased the land, wood has been our most constant companion. Has there been a day when we haven't cut, split, carried, stacked, burned wood? The sun remains low. We return to the edge of that small cliff often, willing the sun to be higher. Scene 3. What does he see? What is the seeing feeling of a forest in a forest? I accompany him to the old growth maple forest where a number of trees have fallen on the sap line. The ease of flow the sap in the lines facilitate is inversely proportionate to the work it takes to keep them up in the wake of fallen trees. I have purchased a small chainsaw, but the truth is I can't see the forest. I walk behind him and listen to his quiet monologue, his language as always mostly unintelligible. I see him scanning, holding his camera hands in front of his eyes, catching the field in the frame. He says something about the beach. Did I understand correctly that its acidity is bad for the maple? We continue walking up the hill, checking each line as we cross it. Yes, he says, pointing to a large tree. That one needs to be down. See, it's unhealthy. It will fall in a year. Look, this one can't thrive. Yep, down. The dog runs in circles, sometimes returning to us with a branch. Whenever he spots a tree angling to fall on the line, he stops. He looks for gravitational angles, wonders about the direction of the wind. He knows how to topple the tree so it falls where it needs. He knows when he should leave it alone. Scene 4. The lumberjacks in northern Quebec live in a subsistence economy that is largely extractive. And yet theirs is an attunement much more refined than mine when it comes to what needs to be left standing and what is in the way of the forest's ability to thrive. The mirror hands see both. They feel what is in the way and what is lively with potential. Despite all the cutting they've done, they know how to recognize a healthy environment, and they are practiced in a respect for its majesty. Theirs is not a maudlin gaze. Sustainability is not their language. The forest is their sustenance. And yet it would be wrong to say that their approach is not ecological in its care for the surround. I wonder how to square the extractivist subsistence stance with the sensitivity in the field framing, how to avoid falling into a moralist all-or-nothing stance about some imagined notion of an untouched, pristine environment. Scene 5. We hear talk of going back to the land. It often comes up when we talk about the 3E Land Project. What is this going back? What is this land that populates the outskirts, that lives in the beyond of the pavement? We didn't go back to the land. We entered the forest to better encounter the forest of the pavement. Distantism reigns large in the strange inadequation of here and there. Distantism is the term John Lee Clark gives to the ableist ocular-centric account of how existence values itself. Distantism is the presupposition that the world comes in the guise of establishing shots, ready at a distance for us to enter it. Distantism is the value we put on all that is already in place, our bodies the agents of those acts that diagonalize it, space left intact in the crossing, body left standing, a perpendicular assemblage out of feel. With his hands in front of his eyes, the forest field in the frame, it might be tempting to posit a quality of distantism. Is that what he's after, scanning the forest for what needs to be culled? I don't think so. The gesture, it seems to me, is relational before it is establishing. And in any case, the body never remains upright. It leans, keels, crouches. The aim is not to single out as much as to amplify, to feel the abundance in the body-world overlap. The vista is attuned not to a spatial distance. It is felt in the weave of its tangled surround. Distantism has disdain for the tangle. Its stakes are colonial, divide and conquer. In the overview, there is no heterogeneity. There is nothing to tend to. Cut it down, clear it, make way. Interlude. Distantism frames existence without the hands on face. Clark recognizes it in the figure of the intervener in deafblind culture. What is this mediator for, this intervener who facilitates access for the deafblind? He is the navigator of distances. She tells you before you even knew to ask what there is to see here at a distance. Her aim will not be to influence you, but to give it to you, quote, like it is. Leaving you without bearings, she is your distantest hold on the world, giving you the world in dribs and drabs. You will come to feel this is all the world is, this distance. He means well, but truly he is the representative of the most depleted account of existence, its logistics. Because remember, her role is to stay objective, to stand aside while holding you up, steering you through, keeping you away from the thick of feel. Because even with the best intentions, the world he moves you through is one which dreads your unwieldy metatactile feel, a world neurotypical in its systemic organization of what counts as body, as knowledge. The intervener in the neurotypical belief that walking stiffly across space, body unmoored, will secure the most direct access to existence, will do so in the absence of any handholds. Out of feel, your world will be reduced to this impoverished schema of coordinates peppered with ocular-centric accounts of what will remain out of reach. Distantism is mediation. It lives and profits from the belief that there is no world which is not already accounted for. And it tells its story plainly, Propriety requires us to move through the world without too much rub. Body, world, cleave. Part 2. Scene 1. The gesture again, hands on face, the forest pulled right in, its tangle felt. He smiles. Yes, he says. This speculative gesture carries an appetite to see, feel the forest differently. In the act of framing, an ingathering of the field occurs. This ingathering, a foregrounding, backgrounding, produces a selection. This selection is active. The hand frame is not meant to stabilize. It is meant to angle into the forest's singular quality. A movement effect is sought in the selecting out. What is oriented toward is the relational field of that particular angle. In the forest, one selected vista looks a lot like another to the untrained encounter. What the selecting out in the framing gesture does is to allow a certain parsing of what is actually an extremely varied environment. What to an unintuitive forest body seems relatively static is vertiginous with micro movements. The gesture is not a taming one, but an inducing one. To see, feel the movements is to attune to what can be culled from the field. Alfred North Whitehead strangely calls this activity of culling for intensity reason. The function of reason, he writes, is to promote the art of life. Reason has always felt like exactly the wrong concept for this activity of subtraction that accentuates existence. Sometimes he calls it its most creative edge, the appetition of appetitions. Speculative reason has the quality of an agencement, an ingathering of what outgathers. Emergent valuation? Emergent valuation, the force of reason at its most speculative edge, does its culling in the ethos of a pragmatics of the useless, which is to say it co-composes in a surround to produce a quality of vitality, a mode of existence, as yet untethered to the modalities of use of existence foretold. Emergent valuation, that quality that unmoors the expected, producing conditions for value. Reason unreasoned and appetite for what stirs and reorients. Scene 2. Emergent valuation cusps existence. It is the force of a cleave that reorients, tipping expectations. In the forest, two tendencies are continuously at work. One is toward degradation, decay. The other is toward exultance. The first tendency is pragmatic, the second speculative. The speculative pragmatism of this tensile weave is its force. One needs the other. What is being gestured toward in the framing is nothing so simple as the death-life binary, a quality of existence is being attuned to that exceeds any simple notion of decay versus growth, or any notion that decay isn't also a complex process. At both limits, the world is undergoing change, and its process is replete with potential. Sustainability is always the wrong term for this excess on itself of life living. This is not about the common denominator of endurance, of almost not better than the baseline modes of living. What is felt seen in the framing is how the forest exceeds expectations, how it exuberantly defies them. What is the art of life? Must the value of life be limited to longevity? Where does the artfulness of existence express itself? For Whitehead, any notion of the survival of the fittest must be understood to be a fallacy. The art of life is not reducible to what endures. To live long is not necessarily to live well. Quote, the art of life is first to be alive, secondly, to be alive in a satisfactory way, and thirdly, to acquire an increase in satisfaction. It is at this point of our argument that we have to recur to the function of reason, namely the promotion of the art of life, end quote. The art of life is more than longevity. It is enjoyment, excess on itself, speculative force. Quote, in fact, life itself is comparatively deficient in survival value. The art of persistence is to be dead, end quote, Whitehead. In the forest, survival is certainly at work in all its majestic endurance. There are enormous rock formations, no doubt the remnants of a glacier's passage. These rocks, the largest I have seen in Quebec, are covered in moss and small bushes, lively with insects. Downed trees are habitat for amphibians, their trunks sometimes as wide as a meter around. The trees are remarkably old for a Quebec forest, very tall, gnarly, the branches opening up only at their tips, odd for maple trees as I know them from elsewhere. The art of persistence is very much in view, but in the tangle, something else is at work. A relational web constantly in flux is nourishing the field. Even more, it is producing it. How things thrive is not strictly mappable onto the useful. Holding his hands to his face in the relation, speculatively attuned, the hands act less as blockers than as amplifiers. This is not primarily about vision, though vision does play a role. His attuning is closer to what Tina Kant calls frequency, an attunement to what amplifies the nature of experience, to what is felt haptically in and of the surround. In the attunement to all that is here and now, he catches a becoming frequency. Scene 3. The art of life is the capacity for difference. It is the modality in the field for life to exceed the form it seems to take. It is the way the more than of the trees, of the rocks, forests come into the field, exposing all that weaves through them. To cut, to clear in the ethos of the tangle cannot be simplified into the concept of extraction. To cut under these conditions is not to clear out, it is to clear in. It is to amplify in the sonic surround the capacity for the environment to thrive. It is to see, feel its verve. Emergent valuation refuses the omnipotent stance of the surveyor. Whitehead calls it the speculative reason, to emphasize the difference between the reduction that leads to the deadening aspect of endurance as ultimate value of survivability and the quality of the more than that produces a conceptual flash, to quote Whitehead, that tunes existence toward the appetition of appetitions. The speculative reason emergently values, enthusiastically refusing the limitations of all we have come to expect. The speculative reason moves us in an abeyance of ourselves. Life living becomes us. Anarchy is at work in this counter-agency, counter in the sense that its agency is closer to an agencement, to an ingathering of tendency that potentializes more than it realizes. The aim here is not to come to ultimate form, to stabilize. The aim is to aim, to be in process, and in process to entangle further into the relations that allow that quality of tipping that keeps life on its toes in its art. Scene 4. In a philosophy of pure feeling, feeling is what propulses experience. Feeling is not personal, it is not mine. Feeling is the momentum of life's artfulness. Feeling motors existence into quality. This process philosophical orientation refuses reason as the moderator, the mediator of existence called. Reason become valuation, is feeling tone. This vibratory quality is not an excess of form. Form is but an angle of its activity, the force of form. What we distantly see is never its pulse. To see, feel it, new qualities of encounter have to be practiced. Knees on rock, nose to moss. The forest is of us. Distantism has kept us in the belief that to be here is to be back to the land. We have always been here in the midst. Scene 5. Anarchy troubles the vista. What is seen felt is not reducible to the frame. Indeed, the frame was never a frame, really. It was an action, much like covering your ears to hear better or closing your eyes to see better. Techniques for attuning have to be honed. Processes emergent valuation requires techniques. It must remain, quote, untrammeled by method, Whitehead. Techniques are practices. In the gesture of culling for intensity, there is no one way. Each surround has its quality of movement, its angle on existence. The pathway must be drawn every time anew. Without respect for the anarchy of all that exceeds the form things take, there is only extraction. In the pull of speculative reasons, techniques of framing, in the neurodiverse see-feel that queers dominant neurotypical extractivist models of ableist existence, The chainsaw increasingly works as a nimble instrument that amplifies complexity rather than as a blunt tool of destruction. For it must be said, neurodiversity is not reducible to a person. It is a way, a modality that endangers the systemic hierarchy of all that neurotypicality values, which is to say, whiteness, colonialism, ableism. As we walk together, climbing over fallen trees, I am led to another way of being in the forest, a way that speaks as much to the space of the surround as to its time. In the anarchic force evaluation, what is drawn by the cut is also a timeline. To cull is to open up the forest to the exposure of more than one time signature, to more than one rhythm. This is not a question of scale, but of metastability, different rhythms of existence in co-composition. The forest spirals space-time in its living forth. We don't speak of any of this as we sweat our way up. I am still following, watching closely which tree is cleared, which logs are piled for later retrieval, and which ones are encouraged to remain on the ground to foster new habitat. We don't have a philosophical language that binds us, or even an ecological one. I don't know how to speak of how important it is to me that this old growth forest continues to thrive. But I do know that his touch is gentle, and that there is, in each movement forward, in each reacquainting gesture of framing the surround, a care for all that lives artfully. Part 3, Scene 1. The long winter colors existence in a play of light and shadow. The shades of life and dark, the shades of light and dark in the layers of snow and ice, a slight tinge of blue-green, a reflection of the often starkly sunny skies, bright in the -30-degree weather, the contrasting greens of the evergreens, the quality of bark, dark brown and gray and green. These color the field. With the crisp and often excruciatingly cold air comes a certain tonality, a play of density, light become volumetric, not a monotone so much as a subdued rhythm, a low frequency, intense in its movement. Color is movement, imbuing more than painting the surround. With the burst of spring growth, a new angle of color's feeling tone permeates the landscape, its vividness as olfactory as it is visual. Thick mud, the remnant of more than a meter of snow, sinks us into the humus of the forest, regenerating. Wildflowers will soon take over, a surprise always, in their persistent impatience to populate the post-winter barrenness. Paul Cézanne writes of coloring sensations that give light. Joseph Albers speaks of color action, of the feeling of color relatedness. That color is movement is a reminder that it is fielded in an excess of vision, in an opacity of relatedness, an action that can never be situated in the distantism of a body-world separation. Color is relational movement, not object. Color is lived abstraction, speculative actant in a field as yet undetermined, movement of forces in tenuous contact. When asked how he produces this vibrant matter, Cézanne replies that it is nature that gives us the means of achieving it. Color is plane of existence, feeling tone tuned toward a frequency that is not reducible to pigment, to red or blue or green. Color cannot be seen in separation. To see, feel color is to be in the frequency of its adjacency. Cézanne speaks of fusioning, of prismatic heat. Quote, only volumes matter, air between objects to paint well, like sensation between thoughts to think well, end quote, Cézanne. The world coloring itself is a speculative at work, the affective interplay of the relational tangle. This feeling tone is met effectively. Spring comes with the feel of all that flows between, the flowering effect irreducible to any one plant. In the art of living well, the world's coloring beckons vistas that foster new modes of bodying, not sustainability, transversality. Scene 2. The three ecologies in overlap, the social, the conceptual, and the environmental. Not 1 + 1 + 1, but the production of subjectivity entangled across all planes of existence. Speculative reason pulses this production into act, pairing the field into its acuteness, fielding a foregrounding of what stands out. Another way of saying this, we are made in the interstices of the overlap, subjectivity produced environmentally in us, through us. Any category of human is a distantest dream, a dream that kills life. Ecology in is this thirdness, this in and beyond quality of an usness that is always in deference of itself. We are colored in this fielding. We, the force of all that exceeds us, of all that is born of an excursion up the mountain in the culling for verve. Speculative reason makes us. We are its emergent valuation. We, nature. In moving color, there is only relational movement. Its anarchic edge a taunt to any commitment to the representation of the useful. The art of life is a drive toward amplification, toward excess, and an ethos of a pragmatics of the useless. The temptation in the distant is clear is to make it useful in that particular way that memorializes the earth and our quote unquote return to it. Make it edible, make yourself independent, call yourself a survivalist. But there is no independence in this vista of the tangled surround. The feeling tone of existence transversalizing is relational through and through. Nature, quote, anything encountered by creative procedure which may be procedurally construed as having been already in operation. Brian Masumi. To be in operation, activist philosophy. Brian Masumi again. Ultimately, the thinking of speculative pragmatism that is activist philosophy belongs to nature. Its aesthetico-politics compose a nature philosophy. The occurrent arts in which it exhibits itself are politics of nature, end quote. Nature as a current art, aesthesis, sensation in the fold, feeling felt, in abeyance of the me standing out. Quote, in activist philosophy, to be is to be felt. Masumi. Scene 3. Emergent valuation at its speculative limit, the feeling tone of existence in moving color is the naturing of relations, nature. Relations nature is univocal. Its power is that it cannot be separated out, that there is no separation between what it is and how it acts. There are no parts to nature, no aggregates. Quote, the order of nature is single and unique. It is everywhere a single power to act. Being affirms itself in a single sense for the multitude of modes that differ infinitely. The unity of the substantial being is not ultimately a unifying unit. Rather, it comes in the univocity of potential, which is expressed in as many gradations as there are modes. Muriel Combe. Leaning on Spinoza while gesturing towards Simondon, Muriel Combe amplifies the carrying quality of nature's univocity, its pre-individual force. The pre-individual does not precede an individual. It is the quality of existence that transduces individuation at all levels. Scene 4. He pauses, catching his breath as we scramble over the logs, still on our way up, lifting dead branches off the sap line, liberating it from debris. He looks around, wipes his forehead, takes out a cigarette. The dog runs around us, trying to lure us into a game. But we are too tired to throw the stick, so we sit for a bit. He points at a mushroom, points to some chaga on the birch. I can't quite see it. We talk about all the ways it can be used as medicine, as infusion. Make coffee with it, he says, and laughs. Or at least that's what I think he says. I look again, trying to spot it. His hands on his face, he scans again, this time looking down toward the maple shack. Now he is looking at the mountain from a different angle, feeling its gravitational lines from the top, noting where the sap lines converge. He points to an old maple, showing me the infestation of ants and the signs of the woodpecker. The tree's weakness is being exploited. We won't take it down yet. It will produce sap for a few years yet. But then it will have to come down or it will fall on the line. What he sees, feels, the force of the pre-individual at work, the way the pre-individual sculpts time through its Tarkovsky and rhythmic pressure. For there is here a cinematic quality, what Callan Curry-Williams might call an after-image, quote, a type of lingering or persistence that stretches across vision and the auditory all at once. This, quote, sensual ensemble is lived, Móokt'aan. more apprehended than perceived, which is to say, activated in the grasp of becoming a perceptual force, the tangle of relation pulses into being in the very same gesture that the perceiver himself is forested. There is no clear-cut separation. Being is becoming. Nature natures. Processes are moved into activity through the force of the pre-individual that courses through them. We become, at this interstice, our human quality quivering in the sensual ensemble. The ensemble in moving color is never a being. Quote, an individuation does not succeed another. Combe. It is not that there was a human perceiving and then a nature naturing. Quote, when people speak of imagining a new possible world, it's in the sense of rearranging relations and spaces, introducing new understandings of what we recognize as nature, as if we were not nature ourselves. Elton Krenak. Nature is not a container. It is the carrying itself, the force that moves the pre-individual across the tangle of relation. Any form it individuates is replete with the tangle of all that is still moving through it. We are made in the crease of the encounters its prehensions activate. We are not the other to these encounters. We are born of the problem nature poses. Quote, if a new individuation can happen to the already individuated, it is according to a pre-individual part that it contains and will function as a starting point for a newly arriving problem. Simondon. The problem moves existence. It is its speculative reason. That is to say, nature is the quality of a problem activating fields of thought. In the encounters after image, nature's thinking is felt. This is what is seen, not seen, in the act of foregrounding, backgrounding. It is not the forest so much that is caught here, but the pre-individual of its pulsing composition, of our pulsing composition, not one two, but one many, univocal. Interlude. Nature's individuations are never reducible to the 1, 2, 1 plus 1. It is not sight, not state. Quote, nature is that very capacity within the state of things that renders further individuations possible. Combe. The operative problem of nature, its problématique, is the movement that moves it into naturing. Movement in moving color is a threat to the status quo. It does violence to all claims of property. It cannot be owned. Misplaced concreteness, to quote Whitehead, is the platform we rely on for the ongoing colonialism that settles us, those of us who reign, who stand out from nature, who extract it to our benefit. Whiteness thrives in this, quote, fallacy of misplaced concreteness that, quote, consists in neglecting the degree of abstraction involved when an actual entity is considered merely so far as it exemplifies certain categories of thought. Whitehead. In the systemic whiteness that paints nature as a site for extraction, as site for the taking of pleasure, of wealth, thought is reduced to the most depleted representation of the useful. We take what is not there to give, and we keep taking it. Quote, corporate sustainability managers have become the sacerdotes of a new planetary order, self-righteously preaching something their employers, by their very nature, can't practice. Krenak. So now I'm going to just go to the end. There's a lot more to this piece, and just finish with 6 points that define for me a speculative garden. And just so you know, I go from there into the discussion of the problem of sustainability as a common denominator, and to the problem of scaling up, which is often the discourse that accompanies it, even in the arena of permaculture. I then move to indigenous philosophies of land, but I'll finish here because I want to have time for a conversation. So 6 points on the speculative garden. 1, a speculative garden is never discernible as a site. It cites a disturbance, a deviation, a reorientation that is too wide in its depth, too deep in its scope to have a clear boundary. 2, a speculative garden colors existence. Quote, colors present themselves in continuous flux, constantly related to changing neighbors and changing relations. Albers. Color is contrast, lived relation. 3. A speculative garden is always and only transversal. The earth seeps into the study. Ground provisions, to quote Stefano Harney and Tony Casilli. In our reading together, we are returning not so much to a physical activity, but to a spooky state, to a material entanglement, an entangled materialism, to a possession without property. This is our Black metaphysics, our metaphysics of non-local travel in the Afro-Asian centuries. At ground provisions, in every visitation and refuge, when we read slow, when we read to each other, when we read out loud, when we read together, we conjure the life-giving arts, end quote. 4. A speculative garden refuses the survivalist attitude. Emergent valuation includes all those corners of life that feed our practices. We never grow things in the simple location of our settler imaginaries. 5. The feeling tone of speculative gardens cannot be framed. They appear in the active selecting out of what most intensely differs. And 6, a speculative garden impersonalizes the land, relationscape. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin, for that beautifully and poetic series of comments. It was really wonderful, and I would love you to send me and all of us the full text, because I'd really like to read it, especially those parts that you mentioned but didn't talk about. They sounded very, very amazing. Well, I see Sanford Quinter here online. Sanford, are you there? Sanford? Well, it looked like he was here. Let me see. Oh yeah, here it is. Let's see. Okay.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm here.
He's in India. He's in India. So you have to understand that we're going to have, like, I mean, this is an amazing, when you think about technology and that we could do this, is incredible. Sanford, I was just wondering if you had any introductory comments or anything you'd like to mention right now. I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Well, I'm telling you, you certainly did put me on the spot, because my bus had a flat tire. I just got home and I'm in the shower. So I'm not going to turn on my, but I've been listening. Yeah,
don't turn on your image.
You're not getting an image, no, sir, not for another hour or two. I have read Erin's beautiful paper twice. And frankly, she got through it much more quickly than I imagined was possible. So I just want to know, for a conversation now and later, since I was in the shower and listening, somewhat remotely, I want to know, Erin, did you read the entire paper just now?
No, Sanford, I didn't, because I would have kept us for 2 hours. So I just read the beginning part, and I left out the part that perhaps we'll talk more about later around indigenous modes of thinking around the forest and about the problems of sustainability.
Okay, well, that's okay. Super important for me to know. I tell you what, Warren, continue the conversation. I'll have something to say, but I'll need 5 minutes.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I'll be there actively. Okay.
Well, I see Barry here. Barry, are you still here, or let me see? Yeah,
Barry. Also not
not
necessarily visible, but but here in spirit. Yeah, I mean, it was such a kind of presentation that just kind of takes me on a long journey somewhere, and it's hard to come back and frame a question the way we do when it's a more here. I better put myself on since I'm speaking a bit. Can you see me? Maybe not. Hello?
Yes, I can see you.
Oh, okay. Because I don't see me, but Yeah, I mean, I'll just throw out this question. Given all that, can you comment on the conclusion to Candide? Il faut cultiver le jardin.
No. I mean, perhaps it would help if I just let me give it a little bit of a context to what I'm trying to think through here. That might just help. Because you know, the question answer may just not be the way to move into a speculative pragmatism, and it's totally fine to just sit with the images that have been shared here. The book was written out of the clear, was written after the first year of a project we call the Three Ecologies Project. And you can find it online. The Three Ecologies came out of about 20 years of what was SenseLab. And it was really a long in gestation project that is finding its footing, that is really committed to rethinking property, rethinking pedagogy and practice. The way in which it rethinks property is that we purchased a large tract of land, which we've gifted to a foundation that we also started so that it would remain perpetually outside of the market, and people could be in experimentation here, in what we call minor sociality, in modes of experimentation across the social, the environmental, and the conceptual. And this comes in large part from our recognition and our fear that many people we care about and love are losing the capacity to afford to live. You know, they can't pay their rent. So how do we create the conditions for property that we find perhaps in environments of thought like the undercommons? So it is in that sense an undercommons, but it's also an environment that pushes us to rethink energy. It's off the grid, it's solar, to rethink how we live or what's important, but it's not emphatically not back to the land project, because anything that would be called a back to the land project would suggest that when we are in cities, we're not on the land, which is something we want to absolutely avoid. So it's more a question of practicing across different fields of sensation, different modes of encounter with the world. And the site that we have here includes a cabin that's always open and free for anybody who wants to collaborate, as well as two other houses. And it is perhaps the place where my own art practice has turned. It's rare now for me or for my partner, Brian Suumil, to travel. We've been thinking a lot about what it means to learn differently and to work differently and to facilitate different ways of coming together. So that's what the Speculative Garden came out of, the piece that I read. And it came out of the incredible paradoxes of the project. There's nothing easy or clean about what we're doing. In order to have a solar house in the north, you have to clear, and clearing is, as Warren read earlier from Out of the Clear, the settler colonial act by excellence. So there's nothing pure in this process of encountering what it might mean to explore the art of living. And as I wrote in the piece, you know, we're situated in what we think of as the south of northern Quebec. We're at the end of the road, literally, that leads into about 5,000 kilometers, or many more kilometers than that, of land that is Indigenous land, as all land is in Canada. But is also crown land that is not propertied in terms of individuals living there for the most part. But this is, you know, this shouldn't be too seductive. because it's, the first extractive industry in Quebec is logging, so you're met with the questions of extractivism in communities that are very poor, and you can come to these communities with a sense of knowing better. I could come to them thinking I know more about the dangers of extractivism, and yet here I am following a local who's become a really important collaborator to the project, who's also bequeaths his land to the 3 ecologies, whose job is to take down trees, and yet he sees the forest so much better than I can. So that's a bit of a context of the work that I read. Perhaps there are comments or questions or deviations. I'd love to hear from you.
Okay. The next question we have is from Sophia. Sophia, please make yourself visible and ask a question.
Hello, thank you so much for that. That was so beautiful. Sorry, did Anu have a question before me?
She's going to wait.
Oh, okay.
She wanted you to go first.
Okay. I guess I'm just, in sort of thinking about this idea of this sort of thirdness, or this, I think you said something about the aim is to aim, which I thought was a very beautiful phrase. I'm curious if, you see this kind of narrative poesis, kind of the form that the text took, as more in line with this kind of speculative sort of, I guess, speculation that you're sort of arguing for, and if you could just speak more about sort of writing in a more narrative versus academic form, and if you see like the potential in that, and why you chose that kind of form.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Sophia. My views on this diverge from some more, how should I put this? Let me start again. I think thought tells us how it needs to be written. And so if you look at Out of the Clear, the book, you'll see that it has many kinds of voices. And I find that there's a bit of a binary that's establishing itself in the academic world of academic writing versus poetic writing. And I don't want to play into that binary because I think it's a false problem. I think the problem is that academia, for the most part, is, the place where thought goes to die. And so we associate academic writing with the place thought goes to die. But academic writing in the essayistic style is just a way of writing that carries a citational practice in a specific mode. What I hate about academic writing in the first way I talked about it is its paranoia. I want to get away from any kind of writing that is so scared of getting it wrong that it has to kind of play politics with its citations. That kind of writing that is like, let me tell you this, let me argue this, and this person has argued, and this, I feel like I'm being hit over the head with it. And I understand what it's doing. I understand that what it's doing, for the most part, is writing in fear. We live in a world that is so policed academically that I think we can get really afraid that we might have said the wrong thing, that we haven't included the 16 citations that we have to prove that we've read, and so on. I would like to get away from this paranoid thinking. At the same time, sometimes I need to write in that genre that we call academic. Often, actually, because there's a way in which I want to hold on to the kind of singularity of a citational flow. So I'll give you an example. When I'm dealing with Blackness, which I write about often, there I find that I'm very, very close to the text. I'm really doing something that maybe looks more academic. And the reason is that I want to learn from Black study from Black thought, how to not put my voice to the fore, to reinsert whiteness into the conversation in that way that an academic voice can have. And so there, I will be in a very deeply citational mode, right? But when I'm writing about walking in the forest with Remy, I'm thinking then, and I'm being then more in the environment of neurodiversity, where language is really not so central. I mean, language in the sense of the one word after another philosophical language. And there, the storytelling comes through me. You know, there I want to give you the feel of the forest, and suddenly I find myself narrating that way. So I guess what I would say, you know, as you know, to people who are interested in writing is trust the thinking to tell you how to write. And then try really, really hard to hold back any paranoia and find a really sensitive reader to always be your first reader. So that when that kind of policing voice comes in, you know, when you send it to a journal and they say, why haven't you cited 16 things and we need a method and you have to tell us what you're doing, that you then have the confidence, not because you think your writing is great, which I never do necessarily, but the confidence of another reader to say, no, that's not what I'm doing. Is that helpful at all?
Yeah, thank you very much.
I'm interested, if any of the participants have a question before I go.
Did you want me to ask my question now, Warren?
Okay, sorry. I was going to ask a question, but go ahead. Yes, please. Please, I'll stop.
All right.
Hold on, let me get out of here.
Hello. Thank you for that really beautiful talk. I enjoyed it very much. And I was very pleased that you ended with entanglement. I want to hear more about that. And I have a kind of a two-part question, but I think you can answer it as one question. On Wednesday, Anders was talking about the work of Jennifer Gabrus around planetary consciousness. And I wanted to actually ask a question related to her work as well, which is about the idea of the forest as a computer, I guess is the best way to put it, as a sort of a collective knowledge base. And so my question is around, this is a twofold question about, first of all, when we look at specific ecosystems, how can we understand them as collective intelligences? And how should we relate to them as such? And then sort of building on that, how do we then think about how to relate to one another?
Thank you for that. I don't know the work that you're referencing, so I can only speak to it in a certain roundness. But let me start from a neurodiverse perspective and say that in neurodiversity, in the collaborations that I've had for decades now with autistics, there is the repeated maxim that there is no felt separation between body and world. So I always begin from there. I don't make a separation between the forest and the body. I'm not saying that there are not instances where bodies are individuated into the forms we know how to take. I'm not saying that at all, but I am saying that this differencing is a habit, and that it's a habit that has deep whiffs of colonialism and whiteness. So that's something I'm trying to be cautious about. Off the top, I would say that it wouldn't be my way to think about a forest as computational. And the reason for that is that there really are differences between the digital and the analog. And the analog is a carrier of the more than in the way that the digital simply isn't. It is not to say that the computational can't algorithmically produce event environments that queer the 1-0, but it does so in a contact with the analog, in my view, at least. And so I don't prescribe to ideas of the brain as computational or the forest as computational. But that would be a much longer conversation. I'm more interested in that environment in works and thoughts like Nora Bateson, who talks about warm data, thinking about the relational webs. And I think that might lead us to the other question about how we relate. I think the first thing is to perhaps get rid of the we, in the sense that as long as we relate, as long as we have the idea of a we that is relating, we're still separating nature and culture. We're still separating human and world. And so practices, I think, have to be invented that really trouble that differentiation. I think that Black study is a place to really learn a lot because of the way in which so many thinkers of Blackness have troubled the idea of ontology, of the study of being, have talked about how ontology is a creature of colonialism and how Blackness has to be para-ontological, which is to say that it is not reducible to a person. I'm thinking here of Fred Moten, I'm thinking here of Abayo Akinlafe, of Saidiya Hartman, of Tina Kempt, of so many thinkers. And to learn also, from those folks who are neurodiverse, who give us a real insight in how neurotypical it is to reinstate that separation. So the question of relating becomes a question of practice, I think. And by practice, I really mean the everydayness of it, of being in the encounter, at the limit, in the paradoxes of what is messy. But maybe others want to respond to that. I think Warren had something else as well.
Yeah. Yes, I thank you so much for returning to me. Sanford, you're not ready yet? Whatever.
No, I am. Listen, I totally apologize. I'm here. Frankly, I'm hiding in the bathroom because there's about 6 people in my room and they won't leave. But I'm getting sorted out here. I would like to say something about, well, first off, about writing, because when you hear a text with the extravagance, I don't know if, I hope that's not taken wrongly, but with the, shall we say, the rapture and the extravagance that one can impress into a philosophical text, as as Erin often does. Now, to tell you the truth, I don't read too many of the academic type writing that she claims that she occasionally does. But I would have to say this, is that having read her paper twice, 2 things are very, very clear. I want to state them right out, since it was going to be the topic of my intervention later today, and it was the following. Every single sentence in Erin's talk, or in the essay from which she drew her talk, was absolutely limpid and clear. It was absolutely coherent with all of the other sentences. In other words, it was absolutely justifiable as, shall we say, a rational argument and a discourse, even though it doesn't necessarily sound that way. Now, the second thing is also, it is also, one could say, incredibly difficult, possibly at times opaque, because there is such an amount of embedded and accumulated understanding that comes from a shared culture, which people, and I don't mean to get, I'm guilty of so many things that one could criticize me for in this, but there is a generational historical experience when there was a certain set, shall we say, of ideas, especially in German and French thought, which created the environment, you could even say the ecology, out of which so many ideas emerged. And those are the types of things that are immediately and reflexively received, contextualized, and understood when someone who shares that culture hears the paper. But it produces an enormous amount, I would say, of gaps for those who don't share it. And it creates, there's an incredible, shall we say, cognitive ecological problem that's happening today, simply because not only is knowledge changing, but the markers, the footholds, the historical basis, if you like, the consensuses upon which communal thinking takes place have become, I mean, they've been savage, they've been torn asunder. And, you know, this creates a certain kind of a problem. So one of the things I was going to say, you know, again, I'm not aware exactly of what Erin left out and what she didn't, and I'm going to have to try to make up for it in some ways in my own talk. But I want to say that you have those two things. So you have the ability to write in a way which produces, shall we say, resonances that produce feeling. In other words, you can present a text where the emphasis is on coloration, which I mean to use that word color in the same way that Erin developed it. But you also have, there's a risk also at the same time of failing to embed those colors in the system in which they accumulated meaning. Now I have to say, this is, I believe this because my own interest is going more and more into traditional cultures. I have to say this is one of the critical ecological, shall we say, ecological problems, or in the three ecology, the third part, which is the part psychic, etc. We are we're in a tough situation these days, simply because when it comes to conveying knowledge, producing knowledge together, the lack, if you like, of that kind of shared situation actually should not give us permission of the kind that everybody is so willing to grab when, shall we say, well, I would say this, is that I think that Erin, in her way, in responding to the question, was also handing off permission to others. I just feel like this is a problem that not only our generation has to deal with, but actually the generations, in a certain sense, that are looking to produce their own discourses and their own way of connecting their discourses to their practices, but also to the history and to the world that we share.
Well, I think that's the crisis in epistemology. And I think that it hasn't been enough time for the new voices that are out there. There's so many new voices, some of which Erin was referring to. So many of the writers writing from a Black perspective that she has been reading, and also indigenous knowledges, that it takes a certain amount of time for, it's like, like for there to be an overturning and then a kind of dissemination. I think that we're in that moment. I think that's the nature of this symposium, this Saas-Fee summer.
Yeah, but not all transitions are the same. Not all transitions are the same. In other words, what gets left behind and what gets carried forward. I don't know, Erin, did you discuss much of the Whiteheadian, Simondonian passages in your paper, or did you delete those today?
No, I kept those. I had to take Whitehead and Simondon with me.
Well, I mean, that was the whole point of the individuation and the pre-individuation that I found so fascinating. And I was going to make a comment about Simondon, because when you're walking through the forest and you're in a position, you were talking about walking in the forest, and Sanford, I know you know a lot about this too. And when you're walking in the forest and you were kind of allowing yourself a new kind of neural diversity. I think was the point, was that there is in the pre-individual, in the development of individuation from the pre-individual, is the idea that the brain is plastic, and it's not something just in the cerebral, in the cranium. It's something that expands out into the social, political, economic, and technological relations, and also goes all the way to the cosmos, to the ends of the cosmos with cosmic dust. And it's something like that, and that's seemed to me the point of the Simondon reference to the idea of neural diversity as you were walking the forest. Am I correct to assume that?
Yeah, absolutely. I should say as well, for people who are unfamiliar with neurodiversity, that I don't tend to personalize either neurodiversity nor neurotypicality. I tend to think about normopathy as whiteness. So normopathy or neurotypicality is a baseline that organizes modes of knowing and modes of bodying. Neurodiversity is the policed and weaponized counter to that plays out, of course, in incredibly singular ways. I mean, I'm not trying to pile everybody into the same basket. There are incredible differences between us. But what's important, I think, about neurodiversity is that it deviates from those normative from those normal pathologies, one might say, that are very rarely foregrounded as such. And so, Warren, absolutely. I mean, as we're moving through the forest, I mean, the person I'm following, he really doesn't speak. He speaks half sentences, and this is a person who lives up here, who would have been his whole life considered to be stupid because he doesn't speak fully. And yet it was very clear to me from the very first time I met him that this was a deeply creative and intelligent person for whom language didn't consolidate in neurotypical ways. His thinking is faster than his talking. And so when I'm thinking about neurodiversity, I'm always thinking also about the ways in which it is, an endangered mode of life, and a necessary one, I think, for these planetary times.
Does anybody have a retort, a rebuttal, a whatever? Does anybody want to ask another question? We're kind of getting to the end. So
yeah, maybe just a quick question from me, if I may, Warren.
Sure, Megan, go right ahead.
This is maybe building, oh, sorry, go ahead. Building on the line of discussion around neurodiversity. Sorry, Erin, can you hear me? I can't tell if my internet
connection. I can hear you. I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Thanks. You've spoken really beautifully about the piece of writing that you presented today and about writing in general. I wondered if you could talk about how some of these ideas of neurodiversity and sort of community across neurodiversity are something that you also explore in your art making. Just thinking about getting away from centering language as a mode of communication, if that makes sense.
Well, you know, everything I do is connected in some way to neurodiversity because I don't know how else to live. And though I'm not that interested in talking about myself, it's also my own experience. And so for me, the question of how artfulness does its work can only ever be a neurodiverse question. It's not about neurodiversity. It's about shifting the contours of how experience tells its stories, you know. in very pragmatic ways, my artwork has been, well, I'll give you two examples from the art archive. One of them is an earlier piece called The Color of Time, which is a piece that is very interested in synesthesia. I'm synesthetic, and every autistic I've ever met is synesthetic. And so it's a piece that works across with color and smell. It's a large scale piece that you can find on my website if you want to look at it. It's called, the website is erinmovement.com. More recently, I've been making rugs for the deafblind community, and this came about through discussions amongst us about architecture and thinking about how spaces generate thresholds in a seeing environment, in a distantist environment. We take thresholds for granted. You know, we see a door jam, or we see a veranda door, or whatever it is that we see, and we organize that door in relation to where we are in the space. But when you're deafblind, if somebody leaves a door open, you have no information. It's very frustrating. It's just an open hole. And so I started to make these rugs, these handmade rugs with different layers of different materials, tufted and knotted, old techniques. I made one for John Lee Clark, who's a good friend and a fantastic writer, if you haven't encountered him yet. And then other folks in the deafblind community wanted rugs as well. And so that's been a big practice for me to encounter that. And experiment with making art outside the visual paradigm. So those are just two examples, but it's all the work we do up here at 3E is sort of oriented toward neurodiverse forms of making and learning.
Thank you.
I have a question, and I'm even on screen, I think. Am I heard? I'm just wondering about my connection.
Well, you're heard. Your environment is on screen, not you.
Yeah, well, okay. So look, I have a question for Erin. I guess I'm provoked, but I've been thinking about this ever since we worked a bit together 2 or 3 years ago. Or no, even longer than that, when I actually read her book on individuation stance. So first off, we know as an absolute fact that we are all neurodiverse from one another, though we don't classify, shall we say, as a category of neurodiverse until the range of our neurodiversity falls outside of the competences that our institutions routinely demand of us. Okay, that's understood. Now, we also talk about neurodiversity as a way of recovering. Typically, we talk about it as a way of recovering and reevaluating the assets that sensory apparatuses, shall we say, or sensory organization in a specific population or person has been, shall we say, has failed to be properly appreciated for what it has, if you like, to reveal to the rest of us who don't share the specificity of their sensory apparatus and so forth. Okay, that's not the question. The question is this: neurodiversity also represents a set of potentials that lie on the other end of the spectrum, which is to say, the domains of expansion and transformation and what they call non-ordinary experience, which and the forms, the attentional practices, all of the forms, even obviously yoga and and meditation and so on and so forth. So what I really want to ask Erin is, what of the, shall we say, the political and ecological potential of of exploring, well, psychotropy, for example, is a term that is more typically used for those who seek through practices or, diet or, ingesting substances or so on and so forth to transform their body state or their mental state, which of course are generally seem to be the same thing. Why does the neurodiversity discourse, why does it stop at one end of the spectrum, and why doesn't it continue all the way to the other side in terms of people cultivating, exploring their own capacities to achieve, shall we say, non-standard forms of perception and also of knowledge and penetration, if you like. In other words, a discovery of how to self-realize, shall we say, in terms of engagement with the natural world, whether it be a forest, whether it be anything else. I'm just wondering if you understand the question after that, and if you have.
Yeah, it's a great question. You keep me on my toes, Sanford. I would have to think about it more, but off the top, I would say this. I've written about this before. A long time ago, I would have been really, really happy to give up the neuro part of neurodiversity and the neuro part of neurotypicality. And the reason I would have been really happy to give it up is because that neuro part of it tends to hold it hostage within certain very, very limited ideas of the brain. But at the same time, the neurodiversity movement is a movement that was built and is continuing to be built by neurodiverse folks in the early years, mostly autistic, and then with time, schizophrenic, bipolar, and so on, ADHD. And I want to honor it as a movement. So, and I'm saying all of this because it seems to me that, or at least for me, let's put it this way, for me, when I'm talking about neurotypicality, I really am talking about normopathy. So I'm talking about the patholization of the norm and the way in which that is maintained. When I think about neurodiversity, I totally agree with you. There could be nothing else. Like, how ridiculous that we would think there was anything but neurodiversity. Then the question becomes, how and where are we talking about its normopathic tendencies? So because I'm working for the most part and collaborating with people who are often in great pain from normopathy, I work with people who don't have language from their mouth, who I don't like to say non-speaking because I just, anyway, who type to communicate, or who communicate otherwise, or who seem to not communicate, but are very much in encounter and so on. Because I work in a university that constantly debases their ways of knowing, that idealizes language in the most normative way, that is constantly acting like language is some kind of hardened organizational principle that should be able to delimit thought. I am careful about discussing modes of experimentation that you can go to and return from, if you understand. Like, I'm being really, really careful here. So, I'm not super, I've been known to not be super patient with the tourism around ayahuasca, or, the ways in which people are having brain experimentations that apparently changes them in the world, when they can come back to normopathic, individualizing, colonizing tendencies. So that's the difference that I would make, while always agreeing with you, of course, that there is nothing normative about thought ever. in anyone under any circumstances, but that some of us do pass better than others. I pass really, really well, and so do you, Sanford. There's nothing neurotypical about you, but it just so happens that you have access, like I do, to those mechanisms, as you said so beautifully, that are valued. And that's something that I think about all the time.
Okay, well, am I on? Yes. You know what? Sanford's giving a talk, and I hope, are you going to be on with him? Are you going to be?
I will.
Great.
I'm going to run and do some work outside, and then I'll come back.
Great. And then we can continue this from his talk, and then we see. I have a lot of things to say about what's going on also, but it's 11:30 and it's time for us to say goodbye. Thank you so much. And I look forward to.
Thanks all. Thank you. Thank you, Sanford, also. Thank you, all the people who asked questions, and all of you. And thank you, Veronica. I've really enjoyed reading you. I would love to be more in conversation.